Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is Daniel Drasin, who has written this amazing book called A New Science of the Afterlife, Space, Time, and the Consciousness Code. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, I think, because the this book is so wonderfully written and actually quite succinct and informative. And I think, wow, how wonderful it is that we're able to talk about it. So thank you. Um,
Mhm.
maybe the first question I had was, what brought you into wanting to explore this area of the afterlife?
Well, that's a good question. I would say ever since my childhood, uh, I've suspected that in the theater of life, stuff goes on backstage. That the world that we perceive with our senses and the meanings that we attribute it to due to our acculturation, our cultures, our families of origin, and so on, um, they construct a useful but illusory sort of facade over a deeper reality. I first started to suspect this really as a young child when I experienced a number of precognitive dreams, and this puzzled me and intrigued me, and it was I didn't understand what it meant, but it was enough to again let me contemplate the idea that we only see the surface of reality. That there's more to life and more to reality than certainly than we can perceive with our senses, and that also our sort of our culture and the ideologies that come with that culture, including the ideology of materialism, you might say, further prevent us from exploring more deeply into the nature of reality. And I don't in any way mean to disparage the accomplishments of materialistic science, which have brought us wonderful insights into how nature works on one level. And it also, science, even materialistic science, sends us a very important message, which is that there is more to reality than our senses can perceive, in the way of instrumentation that can demonstrate that energies exist beyond the range of our senses, and that's science has been very clear about that for a long time. Um, but it also has its own boundaries and its own beliefs about that. That everything, that the whole spectrum of reality can be reduced to what we can sense with our mechanistic, um, you might say, belief system, and the sciences and technologies that derive from that. So I think probably the question of what we call materialism is the main obstacle to our willingness to accept that there's more. I think it's while we may or may not actually personally experience a greater reality, I think knowing that it exists makes a great deal of difference. Now, traditional religions have attempted in their own way to do this. Unfortunately, they have succumbed over the ages to ordinary human foibles and insecurities and the need to create hierarchies and so on. Um, but the general point is that what we perceive in our culture to be the whole of reality is just a small part of the picture.
That's right. And I think there is a rift between what I think now statistically the majority of the population of the world
Mm-hmm.
feels about the nature of existence and what materialist belief tells
Mm-hmm.
us.
Mhm.
which is very black and white. This is how the world works. And therefore, all those things that you feel and suspect are wrong. And I was just saying before we started recording how struck I was by your first chapter, which
Mhm.
is called Materialism 101, and in which you extremely concisely and clearly
Mhm.
outline everything that a materialist point of view tells us of the world. And I'm just
Mhm.
going to share with the viewers a few of those points. We exist in a dead universe, a
Mhm.
framework of lifeless, soulless matter, energy, space, and tick-tock time. There is no deeper, more encompassing, or more alive reality in any sense. Any evidence that suggests such a reality must be ignored or rejected out of hand as erroneous, fictitious, or fraudulent. Goes on. Our universe and our natural environment consists of purely mechanistic parts or building blocks governed by fixed laws. They are incapable of originality, creative volition, or purpose. There is no essential distinction between lifeless and living matter, other than chemistry and relative complexity. We haven't done it yet, but we're firm in our faith that someday we will create living organisms from inanimate matter in some godlike fashion. Does that not make you think of AI? After all, we believe that it's only a matter of the right interactions of the right parts under the right conditions. The entire course of biological evolution in all its incalculable diversity, including the emergence of sentient creatures, is fully accounted for by chance interactions aided by natural selection, the survival of the fittest, most numerous, most fortuitously adaptable, or nastiest. The sudden appearance of new species following global extinction events and the recently acknowledged phenomena of rapid evolution are no exception. It's almost laughable, actually, as I'm reading this, because it's so extreme. The ultimate purposes of knowledge are prediction, control, and here's a real kicker, the exploitation of nature.
Mhm.
Imagination, creativity, and free will can be fully explained as random events. Intention can be fully accounted for in terms of selfishness and physical survival. Consciousness has no fundamental reality of its own. It's only a mysterious byproduct of electrophysiological activity within the human brain. Actual experiences, awareness, emotion, insight, foresight, appreciation, aversion, volition, love, and so on, not to mention the very experience of selfhood itself, are considered epiphenomena, i.e., illusions. And I think, there's a bit more that you talk about. And it's just reading that, it's just again so extreme and so counter to the experience of the average human being that you wonder how it has gripped our society to the extent that it has.
Mhm. Wow. I just wanted to interject one thing about the idea that consciousness is an illusion. Those who promote that idea somehow never say to whom or to what the illusion is appearing. It's as if an illusion can appear to itself, but they don't suggest what the substance of that illusion might be. It's sort of a implied circular reasoning. So, so what does that leave us with? Basically, just words.
It leaves us with just words, and there's two things that have come to mind. The first is that people have been happily blaming Christian um, beliefs for the abuse of nature, because the whole thing about the Bible talking about um, man having dominion over everything. And so therefore that's why we're so gung-ho about destroying the planet. No.
Mhm.
I don't think so.
One thing that, I mean, as you may have read, the longest chapter in my book is about language. And I'm fascinated with how, for example, the mistranslation of a single word can change the world. Right? Now, what was the meaning of the original word in which that chapter of the Bible was written in its original language? Dominion. What does that mean? To me, dominion is part and parcel of responsibility. Yeah. Freedom, responsibility is freedom, and freedom is responsibility. If no one's telling me how to live my life, who's responsible for my actions?
And I
So,
think
go ahead, please.
absolutely, because this is now taking us into the realm of natural law, and yes, we have to take responsibility for our actions. And where we have this business over that little word dominion, actually, while we're all looking over there, we're missing the materialist view
Mm.
that treats everything as though it's dead. And when we treat everything as though it's dead, it means anything goes. And the whole scale exploitation and destruction of the natural world, to the point where we now have geoengineering at a level that the average person isn't even aware of.
Mm.
So, the whole seeding of clouds, throwing aluminium into the atmosphere,
Mm.
um, all of that.
Mm.
And yet we're still going, oh yeah, it's that little word dominion that's the problem.
Mm. Well, that as far as cloud seeding is concerned, this is the whole question of chemtrails and so on is something that I've looked into. I have a background in a sufficient background in science and also aviation. I was a student pilot at one time. And I think we need to be careful because, yes, cloud seeding is a reality. However, it only occurs on a small scale. Farmers will engage a cloud seeding pilot to attempt to make rain over their own property or their own farms, which is fine. It's been going on for ages. But it's a far cry from local weather modification to the kind of things that we've read about, large scale geoengineering. So I'm a little skeptical of that. Just there are so many things that would have improbable things that would all have to line up for that actually to happen. So, if you'd like to debate that sometime, I'll be
No,
glad to.
it's
But
good
your
because,
point, your general point is well made.
and that's the point I'm
Yeah,
making,
yeah,
is
yeah.
that there is this cavalier attitude to life and everything that is sacred, which is very clear in the points that you make about what could only be called a creed, the materialist creed. And that just to think that we're quite entitled to be messing about with nature on this level, whatever the scale is
Well,
questionable.
your general point is well taken because a lot of what we have done to the planet, particularly in the last 500 years, can be called sort of unconscious geoengineering. You know,
Absolutely.
we-
Attitude that
yeah.
nature is to be in some way subjugated, that is leading to its destruction. And you also make the point that along with nature comes us. You know, the destruction of life is not an issue because, hey, you know, um, that's it's everything is an illusion anyway, so it's okay. And I think you make that point in your book, very, very clearly and I felt it to be very, very powerful. So here we have this disconnection then from what people feel in their hearts and yet what they are told, which could almost be, it's almost at a level of gaslighting in a sense, because if we can't trust our what we feel to be true, because the authorities are telling us that what we are experiencing is not true, where does that leave us? So,
well, I think if I can interrupt here, the authorities, in a sense, I don't blame the authorities because they know not what they do. They're simply acting out of their model of reality. And I think it maybe if we sort of, as some people do, sort of get into the blame game about this, then they themselves can get caught up in the duality game, right? So I would, absent a jury trial to determine the truth of a given person's attitudes, my own preference is to view these obstacles as themselves a product of unconsciousness. And in many cases, people simply doing the best they can with life. How many of those who make policy in our world were themselves brought up in dysfunctional families and fell into their attitudes and their actions as personal coping strategies. So I think that as much as we believe we can see through this whole thing, it's tempting to make another either or game out of it, and I think we need to avoid that and remember where we come from. It's like shining a light instead of cursing the darkness. Do you agree?
absolutely. And it's wonderful because in a way I was setting things up there because we have to, we're looking at this cultural manipulation of a perception of a reality, but we are part of that culture too. And it's the extent to which we're buying into the materialist model of existence that is also leading us astray, because we need to be listening to what's inside our hearts rather than letting somebody else tell us what we've experienced isn't real or isn't true. And I think that that's a really important thing, and it's part of cleaning up our own act to be able to say, no, this is I stand by what I feel to be true. And I think that's really important. So,
well, just to interject here for a moment, again, I think there's a real language problem around the notion of feeling, because in English there are distinctions that are simply not made that are really important. There are the feelings that you're speaking of and that we're speaking of, in terms of our sense of what's deeply real. And then there are the random feelings that come along as reactions to external stimuli, to our past, to we walk along the street and we see something that stimulates a memory from decades ago, and it comes to us as a feeling. So again, I think we need to be careful around the language here. Another thing I think we all need to be aware of in general is, and that is the difference between men and women and how they relate to their feelings. And there are good reasons for it working both ways. And each of us, I think, has to appreciate the experience of the other and why those experiences are important. And this is one of the reasons that I've tried to really avoid the question of feelings in my book. And that is not to make it sterile or anything like that. But I feel that's a whole area that needs to be explored that hasn't been. And how that filters down into our language. Sorry, go ahead.
no, far from sterile, I think your book is full of feeling. So it's a very warm experience reading it. So, but I think it's this I guess what I was going to lead to next is, so we have this kind of unspoken materialist view of the world. It's just there. It's
Mhm.
there because it's what we're taught in school. Nothing outside these physical laws is real. This is it. Um, Even though many people might sense that that's not the case.
Mhm.
So that's an important thing. We have a certain group within science who are very wedded to this view, heavily influencing decisions that are made by governments that filters through into education. So we get into this vicious circle.
Mhm.
So where does science fit into this, Daniel?
Well, I think for starters, we have to understand what science is and what it isn't. Right? Science has been unfortunately identified with the materialist perspective. And that's understandable in terms of how science came to be in the first place, partly as a reaction against the church. Science at its best involves freedom of thought, freedom to do your own experiments, um, and freedom of debate. The very important aspect of the proper scientific method is, debate and conversation, and someone can come into a debate having tons of legitimate evidence, and then someone asks a simple question, and oh my God, we didn't think of that. So there's this aspect of dialogue which is present within certain limits in science, but the dialogue does not really include yet, to a great extent, folks who see things in an entirely different way. And again, because our language lines up around conventional science, it's a challenge. So, and this is why I, in my own work, not only with my book, but also with my documentaries. Have you seen my Calling Earth documentary? Okay. Well, the point there is to show that even in the realm of technology, there's plenty of evidence of a reality beyond technology. And for those who haven't seen it, it's a 90-minute documentary about folks having conversations with their loved ones on the other side through modern electronics. It's been going on since at least since the 1950s that in terms of what we have hard evidence of. So I think it's important to the extent possible to provide hard evidence, which is within the normal belief system, that at least tells us something's going on outside that belief system. Exactly what it is and how it works and how deep it goes and so on, we'll find out. But the important thing right now is to demonstrate that the materialistic picture is not the whole picture, at the very least.
And that's one of the nice things about your book as well, is that you invite people to suspend disbelief and entertain um, possibilities. And I really liked that right at the start, that there's this invitation to allow ourselves to explore rather than be wedded to a particular view. So you were talking there about spirit communicating through technology, and I certainly have had people on this podcast for whom that has happened. Messages from WhatsApp, through WhatsApp, etc. Very, very interesting and very heartening as well. Um, what other evidence have you found about that points to an afterlife being reality?
Well, my personal experiences are part of that. Um, Starting out, I've had strange experiences all my life, which is that's a whole other interview. But they've been sufficient to at least to sow doubts in terms of the materialist reality in my own life. Specifically, in terms of the afterlife, my wonderful partner Jane, who died in 2007, has come back and communicated in a number of ways that have been unmistakably her. Um, there's a lot of I mean, I work right now also with a wonderful team of mediums for the last 5, 6 years, and we've put up a website called cosmicvoices.network, and anyone can go there and read the channelings that have come through from a variety of folks known and unknown. In the process of editing this website, I'm sort of the webmaster. In the process of editing these entries, at times the message comes through the medium, and there's something I don't understand, and the medium will put me directly in touch with the person on the other side to dialogue about clarifying what they meant. So that's been a wonderful experience. And I don't know, I could go on for about 6 or 7 hours. But let's just say that I've had sufficient experience to assure me that I sort of know what I'm talking about here, and in questioning the materialistic paradigm. Um,
I think, so
and
many people have experiences, particularly after they lose loved ones. And they sadly dismiss it, as imagination or not real. And yet so many of us who allow for that possibility find that it just gets stronger and gets better.
well, those of us who are in this community are free to talk about it with each other. The challenge for most folks is that, okay, they may be hearing from their loved ones, but who are they going to tell about it? Right? In the book, I asked the question of, how do we know our next door neighbors aren't having rollicking conversations with their dead uncles every Wednesday? And the answer is, how are we going to know? Because who's going to talk about it? So this is the question of the taboo and the stigma and all of that. And we really have no idea what would emerge if that stigma were gone, if there was simply no issues about discussing our experiences. Um, one of the things that happened shortly after my partner Jane passed is one night I was preparing for bed, and excuse me, I had a piano in the bedroom, and I sat down and I played some music that I would play for Jane when she was sick. I'm thinking about her. And so I get done, I get into bed, turn off the light, and all of a sudden the clock radio on the night table turns itself on, plays music for about 3 seconds, and then cuts itself off. So I go like that, and it does it again for several seconds and shuts itself off. Now, my dear departed Jane was a total technophobe. So I don't think that she personally got into the control circuits of that radio. But by all accounts, there are entities whose specialty is to do that sort of thing, to make the connection between the intelligence on the other side and our physical equipment and so on. But the mechanism is not that important. The the focus of our hearts and our minds and our assumptions about reality come into play when it involves communication with the other side. Now, there may be conditions that either inhibit or enhance the possibility of this kind of communication. Some people feel that the electronic communication works best during the waxing phase of the moon and so on. And I think we need to understand more about this, but there isn't the sufficient dialogue and exchange of experience to really set us down that path in any kind of fruitful way. So the best that most of us can do is to practice it on our own or in small groups. One of the folks in my documentary, Vicky Talbot, whose son died in 2001, and has come back to her many, many times through her answering machine and her recording systems and her um, uh, laptops and so on. Um, and she's very good at it in the sense that she knows it's real, that her attitudes are not putting out any kind of a psychic barrier to this. She welcomes it. And I think if we can, there is a question of whether some not so wholesome spirits can be coming through these channels. It's true in psychic channeling as well. So I think part of our understanding is to be tuned in to how things feel in terms of where they're coming from. Because a lot of different people go to the other side who have different histories going back lifetimes. I have a friend who is completely convinced that he had been a torturer in a past life, and in this life he's a really conscious person. He's trying to make up for it. I think he's doing a great job. Now, facing something like that, if you become aware of past lives and past patterns, that can be very sobering and very challenging. But I think it's, again, for each one, we have a responsibility to ourselves and to those with whom we interact in any respect, to not let ourselves be motivated by these very deeply unconscious patterns, which may have been reinforced in past lives. And the whole question of reincarnation is another sort of can of worms, because we don't have, and I don't think we can have on our level of awareness, a suitable picture of what the soul is, what a group soul or soul group is, and so on and so on. I think Michael Newton's work in that regard is really important. He was a clinical hypnotherapist who started his practice back in the 1970s, and who began to observe in his clients these in deep hypnosis sessions, particularly, that they would be giving accounts of experiences from between lifetimes. He didn't believe any of this at first, but what happened was that these many different clients started reporting the same kinds of things, and so he finally threw up his hand and says, I got to be, something's going on here. I need to be scientific about it. So he started recording the conversations, comparing them, and one of the results of this were two books that he wrote. One is called Journey of Souls, another called Destiny of Souls. And a lot of this was material that his clients had recorded. And the parallels are stunning. And this picture emerges of the nature of at least his clients' between lives experience, i.e. afterlife experience. And he introduces us to notions like the soul group. And I think our understanding, our very understanding of what we call the afterlife is itself evolving. Partly because some people who are taking a truly scientific approach to these things, in the sense of respecting the process of discovery, checking themselves to make sure they're not fooling themselves, so on and so on. And I think it's very courageous of many people to employ true science in this way, because the scientific enterprise is a very mixed. Our planet is a very mixed bag, and I think there is much to recommend the scientific method if it's practiced honestly. And it's true of anything else in our world, I suppose. Honestly, and with humility and curiosity. I mean, as people ask me, what is science? My response is, science is organized curiosity. And it's gotten a bad rap.
In a sense, we're wanting to take science out of the lab, because there's so many things that science, in that narrow view of what science must be, dismisses or contests as being real or efficacious. So I, as a hypnotherapist,
Mm.
cannot prove that hypnosis works in a therapeutic context in a lab because people are not machines. Everyone is different. And even when my clients first approach me, and inevitably they ask, how many sessions will I need? I can't answer that
Right.
because there are so many variables. Um, and everyone is so unique and so different. And it depends on how well they relax into it, how deep the trance will be, how complex the issue is, how much unconscious resistance are they having to, and the list goes on and on and on. So some clients might,
And in recognizing all of those variables, in my opinion, you are practicing true science
and this is the thing.
in the best sense of the word, because you
It,
know what you're talking about.
and this is the issue, isn't it? It's science outside of the lab because my understanding of science is exactly as you've said, it's curiosity and wanting to understand maybe life in its natural environment, if we can put it like that. All this, all the studying that used to be done of animals in labs, when actually we need to be studying them in their natural habitats. And the same thing with plants. We need to understand what makes the plant want to grow. Well, we have to understand its natural habitat. And we as people are no different. So I think
Well,
with
there's just a brief interruption there. This is, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that there are aspects of things, very limited aspects of things that can only be determined in a lab. And that's all well and good, but that's only part of a much larger picture. And those who are exploring the larger parts, who can't bring those larger parts into the lab, um, are at a cultural disadvantage currently. But as long as they're doing it, that's doing it and communicating among themselves. I think that's the important thing. And however you label it doesn't matter to me. But I think there's room for the whole spectrum of inquiry. I may question the motives of people who do certain things in labs, but others, I'm sure, are doing very good work. I know there's a woman that I've been corresponding with in the U.S. state of Wisconsin, who has been developing optical devices to minimize the intrusive the intrusive aspects of cancer surgery, especially in breast cancer. And her lab work is, as far as I'm concerned, is entirely beneficial. And as a byproduct of her particular focus, they're also learning things about the nature of light, nature of living cells, and so on. And then there are the accidental discoveries. Recently, I don't know if you've read this, but recently it was discovered that if you, and this was only done first with lab animals, it happened as a result of an accident. If you put a certain common food dye on the skin becomes transparent and you can see into it without having to use x-rays. Now, this is something could not have been predicted, was entirely an accident to begin with. And then when it went into the lab to really determine what was going on and to refine this, in my opinion, this is a huge breakthrough. So there was this, whether the first accident happened in terms of someone's intuition is a good question for me. Who would have thought of putting the food dye on an animal's skin? Was this something of an inspired impulse? I don't know, but I think this is a great example of probably both sides of the brain, as it were, working together.
both sides of the brain working together, and all manner of human experience to be working together. And I
Right.
think this is why I was saying we need to take science out of the lab, because what is done in a lab is going to be limited. In many cases, there may be wonderful discoveries and wonderful work being done. Yes, but that is not encompassing the whole of the experience of existence
Right.
across the myriad of different life forms that we have on our planet. And it can only be limited. And so to say that the only way in which to understand the myriad of the diversity of life on this planet is in a lab is actually very limiting, very
Right.
limited, very constraining, and very flawed. So it's
Well,
the
in science, there is what's called lab research. There's also what's called field research, right? And the two have to work together. They can't be at odds with each other. And field research is narrow in the sense that there are always particular questions being asked of particular disciplines involved. What I think you and I are more interested in is looking more towards nature as a whole to be informed on other levels, to be informed on the intuitive level, on the level of direct experience. And then if that boils down to something that can be inquired into scientifically, that's all well and good. But I think you're absolutely right in terms of where our attitudes are and where we're coming from and how we're regarding nature and us as part of the whole and not us separate from nature. Does that make sense?
yes, it does, and I think that that's exactly right. And so this is the nub of the issue that I feel is holding us back as a species
Mhm.
is whilst we are holding on to a very limited definition of science, we are excluding the real life experience of us and animals and everything else that's happening around us. And I think that that has led us down a very narrow path that is quickly leading us towards a very self-destructive um, manner of living. So it comes right back to what we were talking about with materialism. You, in your book, you outline this absolutely clearly. And it's wonderful to see the work that you're doing in contrast, because that is the antidote to this creed that is being followed many times unconsciously, because it's just kind of there in the ether, to the point, as you've said, where people are afraid of sharing their experiences.
Mhm.
So this is quite important.
Well, I've actually had some fun with this over the years, in terms of asking people about their experiences. There was one of my early obsessions in my life was with the UFO question, and I became aware of this as a young child, even before the the taboo and the curtain of ridicule came down. So there's a time before that when this is a perfectly respectable topic of public conversation. And even then, of course, it was something, outside the box. But very often I would ask people, well, have you had any interesting experiences along these lines? They say, oh, no, 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 this is all nonsense. And we'd talk for a while. And then they would say, oh, wait a minute. It was this thing that happened when I was 14 years old. And the whole experience comes tumbling out. And at that point, we can begin to have a deeper conversation about these things. And I suspect that that sort of thing is true of very many people who have had things occur that they couldn't explain in conventional terms, and had to keep silent about it. I mean, I understand the pressures to not violate the consensus reality, and yet, excuse me, how do we make progress in any sense? And I think that the nature of the progress we need to make is totally along the lines of what you were expressing. You know,
Indeed.
we've been in this psychological prison for so long, and the longer we stay there, the more frightening these experiences can be. Or we're supposed to be frightened of them before we have a chance to explore them.
That's right. And I think this is, and that's why I was saying that, the majority of people actually have had experiences. And I know this because, and I can't remember the exact statistics, but it seems that it's a large majority of the population, right across different cultures, if asked, will say, yes, I have had a supernatural experience, a paranormal experience. And I think that speaks volumes about what is being experienced in real life by people. And excuse me. And it's only when they're given permission to open that door that they're going to talk about it. So this is
there's also, excuse me, there's also this, using the term supernatural and paranormal. When we say supernatural, we are arbitrarily putting limits on the definition of nature, aren't we? You say, well, this is nature, and anything outside of that is supernatural. But who gives us the right to define nature this way, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps it's all natural.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's things are paranormal only by social definition, and it's all can also be an illusion again, because we don't know what's even normal because we can't talk about it. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. And this is the joy of your book, because it is a way of beginning to loosen the tight hold on our psyche, that this idea that only what can be touched, seen with the eyes, heard with the ears, can be real.
Or detected by the instruments that we have at the present time.
Exactly. So,
and of course, detected does not mean experienced,
no.
But it does give us a clue that there is something more to experience.
So this is the joy of your book. And just to remind everyone, it is called A New Science of the Afterlife, Space, Time, and the Consciousness Code. Daniel, thank you so much for your time and your beautiful book.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and hope we can do it again sometime.
I'm sure we will. In the meantime, I will be putting a link to your book in the description box, as well as the website cosmicvoices.network. Is there any other way that people might be able to find out about your work and what you are doing?
Well, I'll send you also the links for the actually 2 documentaries that I've done, which I think will interest your audience. And anyone that wants to contact me directly can do it through my website, which is dandrasin.com. It's DANDRASIN.com.
Great. All of that will be in the description box. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Anna.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be looking at the connection with horses. Until then, goodbye.